Occupy Wall Street disappeared, but their ideas continued. You can't kill an idea. The idea of the 1% and the 99% has lasted much longer than the movement. There is nobody in America, not a conservative, not a liberal, not a progressive, not a monarchist, who doesn't understand what the 1% and the 99% means. So the ideas of Occupy Wall Street and the power of the rich and the power of big banks has stayed with us and has helped shape our movements. The hearing last week where the CEO of Wells Fargo Bank took a grilling from both Democratic and Republican senators. John Stump, the CEO, was in some ways the modern or the most recent version of Occupy Wall Street. The movement to raise the wage. If you had told me just 5 years ago that any city in America would have today a $15 an hour minimum wage, I would have thought you were crazy. But in the upper right-hand corner is the mayor of Seattle signing a law 2 years ago to have a minimum wage in that city of $15 an hour. There are now dozens of cities around the country, including my own city of Pasadena, but also our neighbor Los Angeles and about 8 other cities in Southern California that have adopted $15 minimum wage laws. That's because of the movement of Walmart workers and fast food workers and janitors and many other workers around the country fighting for improving the minimum wage and low-wage work. Right? The big issue of the next 10 years, I think, will be student debt. Students are now sitting in, protesting, organizing. Senator Warren has a bill to address the issue. Both the Democratic candidates for president, Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, both made this a big issue because it resonates with a lot of people. Right? There's a big movement around the country to stop sweatshop labor by having students refuse to buy shirts and T-shirts and sweatshirts with the name of their college on it that are made in sweatshirts around the country. There is a factory that was created by the United Students Against Sweatshops in the Dominican Republic called the Alta Gracia factory. Those of you who are in college, including you at Hood College, should make sure that your bookstore sells the products from Alta Gracia, which is a factory in the Dominican Republic where they pay 3 times the local minimum wage, where they have a union and good health and workplace safety conditions. It's one of the few factories in the world that is like that, but it shows that it can be done. There's obviously a big movement around climate change. Dozens of colleges have already voted to divest from fossil fuels, from their endowments. We've stopped the Keystone Pipeline. This was all a result of protest and activism, not because the arc of the universe was going to bend towards justice automatically. Right? 5-10 years ago, the idea of same-sex marriage was considered crazy. Now over 70% of the American population believes that it should be legal. This is a dramatic change in public opinion in a very short period of time as a result of litigation, protest, organizing, and changes in public sympathy. All of these movements have 3 things in common. And that are things that are true of movements of the left or the right. And number 1 is that every movement has organizers and activists that think strategically and large numbers of people that take their advice and follow their guidance. And just a few of them, from Eugene Debs to Alice Paul, the leader of the suffrage movement, to Walter Reuther, the union leader, to Frances Perkins, the Secretary of Labor, to Norman Thomas, to Miles Horton, who you never heard of, who founded something called the Highlander School in Tennessee to train organizers, Dorothy Day, the leader of the Catholic Worker Movement, Baird Rustin, who organized the March on Washington in 1963, Betty Friedan, who led the first National Organization for Women, Fannie Lou Hamer and Ella Baker, these 2 incredible women that were active in the Civil Rights Movement, Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez of the Farm Workers Movement. But they also had to have people who could inspire us and with their poetry, their artistry, their writing, their philosophy, they're using their athletic ability to promote social justice and social change. Du Bois, Charlotte Perkins Gilman, who wrote The Yellow Wallpaper, the first feminist short story. Lewis Hine, a photographer who went around the country exposing the abuses of child labor. Upton Sinclair, who exposed the crisis in the meatpacking industry in his book The Jungle. John Steinbeck, whose book about farm workers, Grapes of Wrath, raised our consciousness. Woody Guthrie, who sang what should be the national anthem, This Land Is Your Land. Langston Hughes, the great poet, Paul Robeson, the great singer, athlete, and Broadway and film star, Arthur Miller, the playwright, the Weavers, who introduced us to songs from around the country, from around the world, Jackie Robinson, who used his athletic ability to fight for social justice. There he is testifying before Congress. Rabbi Heschel and Martin Luther King, Phil Oakes, the folk singer who sang against the war in Vietnam, the Freedom Singers from the Civil Rights Movement, Pete Seeger and Bob Dylan, Pete Seeger and Bruce Springsteen, Muhammad Ali, who risked his career to oppose the war in Vietnam, and Marvin Gaye, who sang about black freedom through his soul singing, right? Michael Harrington, who exposed poverty in America through his book, The Other America. Dr. Seuss, whose books were about moral outrage, and if you read between the lines, you'll see lots of radical ideas in Dr. Seuss's children's books. Rachel Carson, who exposed the dangers of DDT and pesticides, and Barry Commoner, the great biologist who exposed the way we produce our consumer products harms the environment. Adrienne Rich, the poet, the feminist poet, Holly Near, the feminist singer, Billie Jean King, the feminist tennis player, Tisha Hinojosa, the feminist Latina singer, and Leslie Gore. Most of you under 50 have never heard of Leslie Gore. She was a rock and roll singer. People think I'm crazy to put her up here. She wrote this incredible song and sang this song in 1963 called You Don't Own Me, right, which was an early feminist song that people don't recognize. So she's most famous for It's My Party and I'll Cry If I Want To, but I think she should be most famous for You Don't Own Me, right? Bill Moyers, Tom Morello, the singer from Rage Against the Machine, Barbara Ehrenreich, and our friend Michael Moore. These are all people who every movement needs, people that inspire us, who write about us, who give us hope for the future. And finally, we all have to have political allies. Those are people who are in government and who work with activism, from people in office like Senator LaFollette, John Peter Altgett, the governor of Illinois, who Altgett was willing at the behest of Jane Addams and Francis Perkins to introduce factory legislation in Illinois in the late 1800s. Hiram Johnson, the governor of California, early 1900s, introduced the minimum wage law and the women's right to vote. Franklin Roosevelt, the mayor of New York, Philo LaGuardia. Floyd Olson, an unsung but radical governor of Minnesota during the 1930s. Bella Abzug, the women's activist and congresswoman. Harold Washington, the radical mayor of Chicago. Paul Wellstone, the iconic senator from Minnesota. Harvey Milk, the first openly gay elected official. Bernie Sanders, John Lewis, the iconic civil rights leader, and Elizabeth Warren. Right? All of these are people who've changed our lives. They've changed our minds. They've helped us understand changes. So I just want to give you finally a portrait of where are we now? What are Americans thinking today? 77% of us think there's too much power in the hands of a few rich people and large corporations. 74% think corporations have too much political influence. 60% think the economic system favors the wealthy. 84% think money has too much influence in politics. 85% think we need to overhaul a campaign finance system. 73% favor adopting tougher rules for Wall Street. 64% stronger regulations on greenhouse emissions. 82% big corporations don't pay their fair share of taxes. 79% wealthy people don't pay their fair share of taxes. 68% favor raising taxes on the richest people in the country. 92% think we should have less income disparity. 66% think wealth should be more evenly distributed. 69% think the government should reduce the gap between the rich and everyone else. 64% the government should reduce poverty. 75% we should increase the minimum wage to $12.50 by 2020. 63% think we should increase the minimum wage to 15% by 2020. And 58% think we should increase the minimum wage to $15 now. 80% think that we should require employers to provide paid family leave. 71% favor a public option for health insurance to compete with the private insurance companies. 67% favor lifting the income tax cap on Social Security, require higher income workers to pay Social Security taxes on all their wages. And 70% believe the federal government should fund high quality preschool programs for all children, and 62% support debt-free university tuition. Welcome to Finland. Welcome to Denmark. Welcome to Sweden. If the American people had their way, we would live in a progressive social democracy. How are we going to get from there to another world as possible? That's the lessons of the movements of the 20th century. Dare to struggle, dare to win. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter Dreyer. I hope we're all feeling motivated and re-energized. Our next speaker is going to be talking about training for change. He is a senior strategist with National People's Action, and he has been a community organizer for 15 years on the neighborhood, city, state, and national levels in both the United States and the UK. He has organized successful campaigns on neighborhood infrastructure, immigrants' rights, workers' rights, and Wall Street reform. He is currently serving as Bank Accountability Campaign Director at National People's Action, and I'm informed that he has built a bridge over a moat surrounding a J.P. Morgan Chase shareholder meeting and has stormed across dressed as Robin Hood. Please welcome Jordan Esteval.
Clearly someone found my bio somewhere on the internet from like 5 years ago and ran with it, which is great. My name is Jordan Esteval. I am a senior strategist at People's Action, formerly known as National People's Action. We're a result of a merger between NPA and Alliance for a Just Society and U.S. Action. We are a network of people power community organizations around the country. There are some 50 member organizations in 30 states. Collectively, we have organizers in 100 cities, about 600 professional community organizers working in those cities with people on issues from housing, justice, to climate and environmental issues, to mass incarceration and policing, and about 1 million members across the country. People's Action, we're a racial and economic justice issue organization, and our raison d'etre is that we feel that there are 3 simultaneous big crises happening in this country and on this planet. One, that the planet itself is in crisis. That every summer is the hottest summer ever, and that can't continue. That the economy that we are living in is based on extraction. It's based on runaway inequality, and that's getting worse and worse every year, and that can't continue. And that our democracy is broken, that the number of people who have real influence in our politics is shrinking all the time. One of our assumptions is that we believe that, that the people who are affected most by these issues are the experts on these issues, are the people whose voices are too frequently missing from the rooms where decisions are made that affect all of our lives. I started with National People's Action running our financial industry accountability campaign work in 2008. Sometime previous, I had been working with an organization in Chicago called the Northwest Neighborhood Federation. 2 members of that organization, which is a local community organization working on local neighborhood quality of life issues. Jose Torres and Sonia Cruz were cousins, and they knew each other. They had a fine relationship, and we're working on things like getting the parks cleaned up, getting a neighborhood training, a job training center built in the neighborhood, things like that, and. The organizers who were working with them, built deep relationships with these folks, and learned at around the same time that both of them were in foreclosure, that their stake in the community was under threat, and they stood to lose their homes. And what's interesting about that is they didn't know that about each other, right? They were so just buried in debt and in shame about the fact that that they were so deep in debt, that they had screwed up, they had made a mistake, they had bought outside their means. Further conversations with the organizers, and more and more with each other, we learned that they had both taken predatory loans, right? These exploding option arms that we know now were concentrated in communities of color, in low income and working class communities that they targeted, Latinos, blacks, and elderly folks with poisonous loan products. And they did this systematically, right? Like Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Citibank have all paid like big settlements because years down the line, because the evidence was there. More and more people in our network started telling us stories like this. And it was, it wasn't just mortgages. It was things like payday loans, car title loans, anything to do with debt in the financial industry, where they were really, and this still continues, we're targeting our communities with these poisonous loan products. And this is, you can call it reverse redlining. National People's Action was born in the fight against redlining, right, in the 1970s. So this was, not new to us. For those of you that don't know, redlining is a practice that has a long history, but in the 70s, before they had computer maps, they had like actual maps where they would actually literally draw a red line around the black community and not make loans there, right? So it stopped black folks for generations from building wealth in their communities. That campaign spread throughout the organization, and prior to the big financial crash in late 2007, we had already protested at Ben Bernanke's house, and got a meeting with him, right? And he told us in that, we told him, look, thousands of people in our neighborhoods are losing their homes. Every other house is abandoned in some of our communities. There's a crisis underfoot. He said, there's no crisis, the market will self-correct, right? And then later that year, literally, Lehman Brothers went under, AIG got a bailout, the rest is history. This is to say, back to my earlier point, the people who are affected by the issues are the experts on these issues. And they saw this coming. And if we invest in their ability to work together, to organize, to come together and build power, and actually listen to them, then we can make a lot of good things happen and prevent a lot of bad things from happening. These conversations between people, they don't happen by themselves, right? It takes organizing, especially as the trend is that the social fabric of our communities is disintegrating, right? The trends are toward more isolation, more individual action versus collective action, and so we need to fight that actively. After the crash in 2008, a lot of us were kind of frozen, and tell me if you remember it this way, but for like a good year, there was no protest against, or nothing visible, nothing major against the banks and the financial industry, right? There are a lot of stories about, and there's a narrative brewing about how the financial crash was the fault of brown people trying to buy too much house. That narrative started to really take hold, and there's and we said, you know what? We need to take people. We cannot let our own people, let alone the rest of the world, believe that, right? We need to move people from private shame, private frustration, to public anger. And so, in 2009, we learned that the American Bankers Association was going to have a convention in Chicago. Chicago, of all places, right? Super hard-hit city by the financial crash. And we said, we can't let them get away with that. So we called thousands of people across the region and across the country, and 1,000 of them answered the call. and came in from Iowa, from New York, from Nevada, from Wisconsin, Michigan, from all over, and we decided we're going to have our own convention across the river from theirs, and we're gonna have this conversation with our people about who actually is to blame for the financial crash. And who's actually to blame for all these foreclosures and communities being decimated? And we're going to invite some of our friends. Like Elizabeth Warren, pre-Senator Elizabeth Warren came and spoke with us about this crazy idea she had about a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that would regulate banks on behalf of consumers. And we took those lessons and we marched. We hit, we did actions on Bank of America in downtown Chicago. We did actions on, all the bank offices and their biggest branches downtown. And so the first day we had 1,000 people. The second day we had 2,000 people. The third day we had 5,000 people at the footstep of the American Bankers Association conference. And we also had, a few hundred people hidden in hotel rooms at their conference who, during the conference were actually able to get inside the hotel and disrupt their conference and get in their faces and tell them what was really happening in our communities. Powerful action. But what's key about that is nothing like this had happened since the crash, right? And so all the media really, for years after the fact, we saw our people, folks like Jose and Sonia, on B-roll that was used on news clips to show that people were angry at the banks. And it was really, this very simple thing that was missing from the conversation was actual evidence that people are up in arms. And that's where we saw the change of narrative, the beginning of the change in the narrative from, this is people's fault to this is Wall Street's doing. I wish there were a timer here so I knew how much time I had left, but 5 minutes? Cool. So the JP Morgan Chase action was also a great one. It turns out, lots of our folks had mortgages with JP Morgan Chase, got predatory mortgages from JP Morgan Chase, and we decided to let them know that at their shareholder meeting, which when we went to see the location where that's going to be held, it turns out they're going to have it not in New York, where they usually had it, but they're going to have it at their corporate headquarters in Columbus, Ohio, which apparently we learned is the largest office building in the world after the Pentagon, second largest in the world. And it's this giant, building surrounded by a giant parking lot, surrounded by, I kid you not, a moat, or like a drainage ditch, but it's there to keep traffic in. And so we said, moat, that's perfect. And as the person who introduced me stated, we built a drawbridge, and we dressed like Robin Hood. And we said, what, we're gonna take back what's ours. Again, generated lots of news, visual evidence about the fact that that people are angry at the banks. There's another note that I want to make about this, which is, there's a rich and important interplay between what you call maybe organic social movements and kind of professionalized or institutionalized community organizing. And we see that play out again and again, where the big, splashy, and very resonant movement isn't enough by itself, right? Doesn't last by itself, and that professionalized community organizing also isn't enough by itself. Like, you need both. So you see this with the previous speaker named the Occupy Wall Street movement, and how there are others now who are really running with those ideas and have been able to turn those, to translate the ideas of 99% versus 1% into things like real traction on the fight for 15, right? Fight for $15 minimum wages in multiple states. We see it in the huge amount of kind of political space that was opened by the People's Climate March in New York City. 400,000 people taking the streets in New York to fight against climate change. It's created tons of momentum for organizers on the ground working on those issues, and not at all least Black Lives Matter. I'll give a very brief anecdote about that. So this is back in Illinois. Anita Alvarez for years was the state's attorney there. She's the state's attorney who famously suppressed the video of the murder of Laquan McDonald, and was responsible for policies that incarcerated really hundreds of thousands of black folks in Illinois. And she had an opponent, Kim Foxx, who grew up in Cabrini Green in the projects in Chicago, believed in restorative justice, wants to work to heal communities rather than punish them. And the BYP 100, the Black Youth Project, got on the streets, did amazing direct actions, got a lot of media attention because it's young black people fighting for their own rights. And at the same time, our members in Illinois, the People's Lobby, Fair Economy Illinois, Illinois People's Action, Southsiders Organized for Unity and Liberation, established community groups. They were out there on the doors, knocking on doors for Anita Alvarez. They produced more volunteer and hours for her campaign than any other organization. And we won that election, and Kim Foxx is now the state's attorney in Illinois. Both the movement and the organizing were critical and insufficient for that moment, and we think there are really important lessons to learn from that when we can take movements and organizing and bring it together. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Jordan, for reminding us all to have a little fun while we're at it. Our next speaker knows how to do that, and he also knows a little bit about overcoming civic apathy, which is the topic of his speech. He has been named by The Atlantic as one of the 100 most influential figures in American history, and by Time and Life magazines as one of the most influential Americans of the 20th century. He has helped us drive safer cars, eat healthier food, breathe cleaner air, and drink cleaner water, and work in safer environments for more than 4 decades. We are here in part to commemorate the publication 50 years ago of his best-selling book, Unsafe at Any Speed, which led to congressional hearings and led to the establishment of the National Traffic and Motor Vehicle Safety Act. He was also instrumental in the creation of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, and the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration. His recent books include Unstoppable, Return to Sender, The Good Fight, and the bestseller 17 Traditions. He writes a syndicated column, he has his own radio show, and he gives lectures and interviews year-round. Please welcome Ralph Nader.
Thank you. Thank you. I have an awesome subject today. It's called Overcoming Civic Apathy. And obviously, we really haven't been able to find the various answers, although there are some luminous exceptions. And that includes yours truly. Just look at all the elbow room you have today. So I want to start with what I call the civic personality. You know how they say in sports, there are a lot of super athletes, but just a few really make the difference at the end of a game? It isn't because they have superior physical qualities. They have physical qualities others have. They have that nth factor, that will to win. They have that athletic victory personality. Well, in this civic society, we have to develop that kind of civic personality. And it's something we all know in terms of talents. People who have a certain perceived sense of injustice, that's a good start when they don't have to abstract about certain changes that need to be made for a better society. Right where they live, they are being victimized or oppressed or harmed. I'd like to start with 3 very short stories involving Isaac Newton, William Blake, and Albert Einstein. And at one time at a gathering, Isaac Newton was asked by an admirer, Mr. Newton, why are you so much more brilliant than other scientists? And he looked at her and he said, well, I'm not really that much more brilliant than my fellow scientists. I just have a perhaps greater ability to concentrate longer on a problem in my mind. Concentration. Pull that out. Concentration. William Blake in the 18th century and early 19th century, great artist and poet. He was at a social gathering and someone came up to him and said, Mr. Blake, with whom are you living these days? And he looked at the person and said, with whom am I living? I'm living with my imagination. Pull that out, imagination. Then Albert Einstein once said, with typical understatement, quote, I have no special gifts. I just have a passionate curiosity. Pull out the word curiosity. Now you ask yourself, people who are actively engaged in building a more just society and a more functional democracy usually have those traits at one level or another. They're curious because they show up. All over the country, people are telling me, we can't get people to meetings, we can't get people to vote, we can't get people to rallies, we can't get people for neighborhood gatherings about a neighborhood problem. It is very pronounced. These people are increasingly living in virtual reality when they're not busy trying to make ends meet and surviving. They're looking at screens, young people especially, looking at screens, and that's not quite the way to get people out. You get them informed, you tell them about meetings, but getting people to meet people, that's when things are done, is extremely difficult. I was at a gathering once in Massachusetts on a civic organization, and a young man in his early 30s stood up and said, I'm from Weehawken, New Jersey, 14,000 people, down, depressed area, a lot of empty factories and so forth, and things in disrepair. And I couldn't believe how this town government wouldn't do anything about it, So I decided to go to a town meeting. So he gets up, he goes to a town meeting, he's the only one there. So he says, well, maybe it was Super Bowl night or something. So he goes to the next town meeting, he's the only one there in the audience. So I said to him, well, you got 10,000 adults in Weehawken, and you seem to know what most people in the city want. They want a functioning city, right? They don't want to break their axle on a pothole that's been there for 2 years. What if you had 100 people there that had your motivation? He almost fell down. He said, we changed the whole town. Well, 100 people happens to be 1% of the adults in Weehawken, New Jersey. Apathetic people have always fascinated me. I actually dream about them. I try to understand them. Number one, they are clearly in the majority. Number two, they gripe a lot. They have all kinds of complaints. Sometimes it's seen as cynical, but they really complain about a lot of things. Quietly, they don't go out in the village square, but they have a sense of injustice, like everyone else. Thirdly, they almost are unwilling to break their routine. They have their routine, they have their hobbies, they work hard, they raise their family. They do a lot more difficult things in life than spending a few hours a month on their civic responsibilities. They raise children, try that one for difficulty. They take care of an ailing parent or grandparent. They have 2 jobs, they have to pay daycare, they have to commute, they overcome accidents, that they weren't anticipating. And yet, can you at least come to the town meeting? You agree with me. You want something changed here. You want the school repaired. And you want the drinking water cleaned up. I'm not trying to persuade you of anything. Just, can you come? Can you show up? Nope. Well, can we discuss it? Yeah. Well, why don't you show up? Hey, you think just because I'm apathetic, I'm stupid? Here's why I don't show up. Number one, I don't have time. Number two, I don't know all those Robert rules and when lawyers for towns tell us to shut up and sit down, and I just don't know. And number three, I don't want to be slandered. I don't want to be talked down to. I don't want to be libeled and all that and get in trouble with my boss because I'm seen as a troublemaker. And number four, even if I had the time and I wasn't blistered by moonbeams and I didn't care about what others thought about me, it wouldn't make any difference because the big boys are going to decide anyway. Those are the 4 iron rules of apathy. So I decided during the campaign in 2000 to take it to the next creative step. So I proposed on the website, and it's still votenator.org, I've left it up for these purposes, the creation of the American Society of Apathetics. I invited people to join. And I said, in the interest of being as inclusive as possible, the Nader Gonzalez campaign is inviting membership in the new American Society of Apathetics. Membership is free and simple, appropriately enough, with no rights because of the Society's dedication to no exertions whatsoever, except to recite the solemn oath of the apathetic to yourself. And here's the oath of the apathetic. Quote, as a member of the American Society of Apathetics, I solemnly swear and declare that I will endure any injustice, accept any abuse, absorb any disrespect, suffer any deprivation, concede any exclusion, inhale any toxics, and avoid any public responsibilities in order to defend my inalienable right to apathy, so help me, my descendants, and my country. End of quote. We got no takers. Someone told me that we put them in a conflict of interest. If they made the oath of the apathetic, they would no longer be considered apathetic. They have standards, you know. So let's find out what worked in the past in terms of civic engagement, because people are people everywhere. They all have their burdens and their pressures. And why did some people in the past show up? Why did 6 women in 1840 show up in a farmhouse in upstate New York to start the women's suffrage movement? What was it about them? 6 women? You know what they were up against? All these industrial businesses and so on that didn't like women because they fought to end child labor, and they were consumer advocates. Price of food, they fought, so on. Why did people show up to vote for the Liberty Party against slavery in 1840? That was the first party of any size to be against slavery. Why did all those workers have those sit-down strikes in Flint, Michigan, and Warren, Michigan in the 1930s, putting all their livelihood on the line? There was no Social Security, no unemployment compensation, zero to support their families, to form the United Auto Workers. Why did they do that? Why did people march as farmers and sign up 200,000 farmers in 6 months in a few counties in Texas in the late 1880s to start the populist progressive movement, the most fundamental political reform movement in our country? Well, one reason was perceived injustice to themselves. The farmers were being fleeced by high interest rates by the banks, loaned them for crops, and by high railroad freight rates to get their crops to market. The women felt deeply disrespected, and they felt the men weren't addressing a lot of the issues the women were concerned about. The workers couldn't live on what they made, working 50, 60 hours a week in an auto plant, it's not easy. And the hazards and the occupational deaths and the diseases. So we take the first motivation was perceived self-interest. They weren't abstracting to injustices that accumulated all these specific injustices. They hadn't reached that level yet. Some of the socialist innovators in those days would try to get them to a higher level of political and economic transformation. The second motivation that got people to do things was they had leaders who formed political movements. And so more and more people supported Social Security because they followed Norman Thomas, who ran for president on the Socialist Party in the 20th century and pushed Franklin Delano Roosevelt into adopting more social net innovations, like Social Security. And they also pushed the early socialist parties' full health insurance, unemployment compensation, a 40-hour week, progressive taxation, and the like. So you can see that political movements often match civic movements, but almost always civic movements precede formal political movements. Underneath all are citizen groups. That's a pretty good generalization. Now, the third that got people going is more current. How come there are people pushing for a restored minimum wage or a higher real minimum wage, and nothing happened? 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, we push Obama, say you wanted a $9.50 minimum wage in 2011 during your campaign in 2008. The labor unions are supposed to be for it. Nothing happened, and then it started happening in 2012. You know why? It's called money. Justice requires money. And the SEIU labor union put up millions of dollars, and suddenly there were buses full of protesting workers. There were marches in front of Walmart, and McDonald's, and Burger King, and so on around the country. The will was there, but the facilities were not being paid for. And so money was behind a good deal of the success of the women's suffrage movement. Rich women who, from Philadelphia and elsewhere, put the money in. Rich Bostonians put money in the abolition of slavery. The more recent civil rights movement and environmental movements, they were accelerated with contributions from wealthy people who were enlightened. Another approach is to give people a sense of small victories so they get their morale up for bigger victories. So it is important to develop a sort of sequenced movement whereby there are victories along the way, but the major goal has not yet been achieved. Another way is skill. You know, people have hobbies. I'm really amazed by how much time and brain power people spend on hobbies. They spend 300 to 500 hours a year, and they know their hobbies from beginning to end. Poker players, bowling, classic car collectors, stamp collectors, you name it. They really know their stuff. And they spend at least $500 a year on their hobby. And they enjoy it the more they're skilled at it, the more knowledgeable they are. And so move into the civic arena. Obviously, if you don't have any civic skills, if you're never taught it in undergraduate college or high school or middle school, you're going to be less likely to become an active citizen. It just stands to reason. If you know how to do something, you're more likely to do it than if you didn't know how to do something. And so, what are our schools spending all their time on? Computer literacy? Why don't you start with civic literacy? That'd be a good idea. Is there any reason why 100% of all high school graduates should know how to use the State and Federal Free Information Act? Information is the currency of democracy. We teach it in our high school in Connecticut. It takes a couple hours. They file a letter to a government agency, I want the meat and poultry inspection reports. or I want the nursing home report, I want this, I want that. That's a great breakthrough, actually, that we had a good part of in the 1970s in the Federal Free Information Act. It's so easy to teach civic skills because when you connect students in the classroom with things going on in the community, they get tremendously motivated. It's real. It's not sitting in a classroom with a computer in front of you, or if you don't have a computer in front of you, the process is memorization, regurgitation, vegetation. Multiple choice tests, next, memorization, multiple choice tests. We are basically training young people to be ineffective and uninterested citizens. We're training them to be cogs in corporate and other bureaucratic wheels, and as a result, they don't live very happy lives. They don't live very lives where they can meet the necessities of life to begin with. Look at health care. Look at the lack of any adequate public transit in so many places in the country, or inadequate housing, and so forth. So we have to say, why don't we start afternoon civic skill classes for students and parents who volunteer? You don't have to change the curriculum. That's very difficult. It would be good if you did, but if you didn't, you can still start these afternoon classes. A lot of schools have empty classrooms, and at least it will start the ball rolling, and you will see how much more motivated the students are in their regular classes, how much more challenging and questioning they are. Now there's another aspect here that relates more to young people, but during the anti-Vietnam demonstrations and college campuses, and we learned something very interesting. And that is, if you're part of the risk as a citizen, you're more likely to be part of the solution. Well, one of the reasons why big business executives never propose solutions for the people where they're employed or customers or communities is that these executives are not part of the risk. They have impunity, they have distance, they have immunity, and they have all the pleasures of life. They're not where the environmental racism is, and the slums and poor areas in our country are huge toxics that they produce. And it's good for students to understand the history. One of the reasons students really stepped forward in the 60s is because they were part of a risk. They could have been drafted. They were part of the risk. They were badly treated in places like in the South, especially if they were minorities. They were part of the risk. And if you're part of the risk, you're more likely to get out and protest and be part of the solution. And that's a very important motivation as well. We have also to ask the question, okay, you have citizens, they don't think they have any power. Marcus Cicero defined freedom as participation in power. So we have to stop just defining freedom as freedom from oppression, from police action, from the oligarchy and the plutocracy. We should define it as well as participation in power. And when we do it that way, we have to admit that most of us don't have any power. Because we don't have the power. We have personal freedom. I mean, you know, most people can choose their friends, choose their food, choose their music, choose who they're going to walk and hike with, choose their mates. They can choose a lot of things, and they have a lot of personal freedom. But civic freedom is another thing. You know, do you have much freedom to participate in the power that shapes our tax system, our peace and war choices, our local environment, the uses of public budgets, and so forth? Well, the answer is obvious. In most cases, the answer is that kind of freedom is not available. So it's good to start saying, what are our assets? Okay, we don't have all that much power. What are our assets that we can deploy? Number one, we outvote the corporations immensely. We're millions of votes. Corporations don't have a single vote, not yet any. Okay? Number two, we have far more energy than our adversaries in the plutocracy. They just have coasted. They've gotten soft, and they're not that great in number. Number three, we have our consumer dollars. What are we doing? Putting our money in JP Morgan Chase and buying metropolitan life insurance policies. We have some of the most progressive groups in this country. Nation Magazine, Democracy Now!, City Lights, and when I get little checks from them for expenses to go on the show or a little advance, I look at the check. It's JP Morgan Chase. It's Wells Fargo. What are we doing spending money when we can spend money on community banks and credit unions and patronize farmer to consumer markets and local sustainable energy and community health clinics, start them if they're not there. Take our dollars away from global business, you weaken them. They've got $2 trillion stacked up in money, the Fortune 500. That's our money originally. Where did it come from? It's our consumer dollars. Where did it come from? The next asset we have is that we own the greatest wealth in the country. What? Come on. Of course. We own, together with all other Americans, the public lands onshore and offshore. That's about the size of the U.S., by the way. All the natural resources. We own the public airways over which the radio and TV stations transmit their programs. We're the landlords, the radio and TV stations are the tenants, and they pay us no rent, and they decide who says what 24 hours a day. Some tenant rights, huh? So you ever look at network TV on Saturday afternoon? Hold on to your stomach. It's like nothing else happens in America except guys going flip-flop and their bikes, infomercials selling you kitchen appliances, grade B movies, and a few sports here and there. Isn't there anything else going on our property? It's our property. Imagine if we had our own audience network. And we have other assets, our tax dollars. We're grumbling about taxes. Why don't we grumble about what we don't get for them? Reciprocity. That's the important thing. What don't we get for our taxes? We've got to be more demanding in terms of what are we getting in return for trillions of dollars of government R&D that we pay for that have built the great industries in this country whose executives take credit for themselves, like the semiconductor industry, a good deal of the pharmaceutical industry, the aerospace industry, the biotech industry, the nanotech industry, the containerization industry. This stuff came out of the Pentagon, NASA, National Institutes of Public Health. See, once you start amassing the assets, we get a higher morale boost. Now, we helped start the PIRGs, and the Public Interest Research Groups. Here's where another morale factor gets in. If it's easy to band together, you're more likely to band together. If you can't find each other, it's hard to band together and become an effective force. So we persuaded students in the early 70s to vote to put a check off on their utility bill and assess themselves $5, $6 a year. It goes into a nonprofit group called the Student Public Interest Research Group, like NIPIRG in New York, MassPIRG in California PIRG. And they hire young people who are lawyers, scientists, organizers, publicists, lobbyists, and they've done an enormous job with a tiny, tiny bit of their resources connected through this facility on their tuition bill. You can go to USPIRG, USPIRG. The head of USPIRG is going to be speaking on day 3 at Constitution Hall, September 28th of this month. So let me end on this note. We need to think very strategically, not just in terms of what's wrong. We need to think of how to have a higher estimate of our own significance as citizens. That's part of civic self-respect. We need to think creatively. How do you develop mechanisms where people band together as utility ratepayers, right? As tenants, right? As workers, right? As taxpayers, right? As consumers in various areas. We need to recognize that the most successful lobbyists on Congress do not mess around with marches and rallies. Have you ever seen the NRA with a massive rally in Washington? Have you seen AIPAC with a massive rally in Washington? It's because they focus on 535 people, their staff, their doctors, their lawyers, their accountants. That's what they do. Focus, complete focus on their members of Congress. Laser beam is what I meant to say. Focus. And that's how they get leverage. They know there are 535. That's just smart strategy. Developing checkoffs to get people together, depending on their class or their economic interest or role. That's just smart politics. And the final thing is to start utilizing the rights we already have. We underutilize our rights when we're wrongfully injured under tort law, the law of wrongful injury. 98% of the people who are wrongfully injured don't even go to a lawyer to file suit or a claim against their perpetrator. We totally underutilize our rights of contract. We sign on the dotted line or click on. We don't even see the contract. And then they charge us $35 for a bounce check that costs the bank $1.50. Do you ever say to yourself, did I agree to that? Did I agree when the airline said that they can change any deal on frequent flyers without our consent? Did I agree to that? Did I agree when the hospital said, the moment you went through the doors and you signed a general consent form, you agreed not to go to court in case of a malpractice? Would I agree to that? The two great self-actuating freedoms out of medieval England to the U.S., the law of torts, the law of contracts. That's what the entire day 4 at Constitution Hall is all about on September 29th. So do spread the word. And remember, out of the smallest exertions can come great movements. Middlebury College, a few years ago, Bill McKibben had a students class. They're talking about climate change. Finally, a student stood up and said, what are we going to do about it? All we do is talk about it. So Bill McKibben said, what do you want to do? Well, we want to march on climate change issues to Burlington, Vermont. So 1,000 students marched, and reporters told them, this is the biggest march that ever occurred in the United States on climate change. And they said, what? Here in Vermont, we're the biggest march? Something must be wrong. So they started 350.org, and it's got chapters all over the world. It's put huge rallies into place, and it has 100 or 50 full-time people already. One little class, Middlebury, Virginia. It is not only nature that has seeds that grow into mighty oak trees. It's you and you and you. Thank you.